Do you have ADHD children within your mainstream classroom and you are wondering how best to support them? Or do you have ADHD children coming into your classroom in September and you are wondering exactly what to do to help them thrive? If so, then you are in the right place. I'm Danielle Douglas. Welcome to Let's Talk Behaviour, where we make behaviour management easy using neuroscience. We are now in 87 countries across the world, and our behaviour planner was Education Book of the Year 2025 finalist. If you find this video interesting, then you are going to like this one and find this one interesting. And this is about our wobble cushions, the pros and cons of exactly how we should be using them. We also have hundreds of behaviour resources that you can get hold of now. So if you have ADHD children within your mainstream classroom, then you are in the right place. Grab your coffee, grab your notebook, and let's get into it. So for the last 15 years, I have had over 60% SEND children within my mainstream classroom. We do not have alternative provision for our SEND children. They are in our classrooms at all times, which means for every year for the last 15 years, I have had at least 2, if not more, children with ADHD within my mainstream classroom. So how exactly did I support these children within the classroom, help them learn and get them to thrive? Let's take a look. There are lots of things that we can do to help support our ADHD children within our mainstream classrooms. One of the main things that we would do is prepare visuals. Now, these aren't just for our ADHD children, these are also for our mainstream children as well. But our ADHD children often struggle to process verbal information, especially when there's lots of it. So by using visual information and pictures and by stopping talking so much, we can help support these children process and understand information. By using visual and verbal information, this is called the dual processing theory. And this helps children process information from the working memory into the long-term memory, meaning they are much more likely to remember. We would also use visual and verbal information because, thinking about the forgetting curve by Ebbinghaus, children will have forgotten 50% of information within 1 hour. 50% in an hour is a huge amount of information that child will have forgotten. So by using pictures, we can help children process and remember information. So if we think about this in context of our ADHD children, information like stop running within 1 hour will go from stop running to running because they will have forgotten 50% of that information within an hour. So we often hear our teachers in schools and our parents saying, I've told them, they don't listen. They just simply cannot remember and retain the information that they are given. We also use things like task management strips to break down our information and tasks into small chunks to help these children. Using task management strips breaks down every task or activity into 3 simple instructions. By using task management strips combined with our visual and verbal information, it gives the children the best chance possible to remember and retain the information that they've been given. Breaking down tasks for these children makes them more achievable and much more likely for the children to be able to do, access, and be confident in tackling the activities. Another thing that we have done to support our ADHD children within our mainstream classrooms for the last 15 years is adding in regular movement breaks. Now let's talk about this a little bit more. I have got a whole video about adding movement breaks into the mainstream classroom. And I don't want you to think, I don't have time, or how can I possibly do this? I have done it for 15 years and we now introduce this into schools all of the time. Movement breaks, sensory breaks, and regulation breaks aren't just important for our ADHD children, but also for our mainstream children as well. And since the introduction of these movement and sensory breaks within the classroom, we have seen a huge difference in behaviours, not only from the children, but also from the adults. Now, there are a few things that I would like you to think about when we are thinking about adding movement and regulation breaks. There are different types of movement, regulation, and sensory breaks that we can add. Children with ADHD spend a huge majority of their time sitting in the amygdala brain. Now, the amygdala brain is the emotional part of the brain. This is the fight or flight brain. This part of the brain is not thinking, not processing, and not listening. We cannot try to teach these children unless they are in the prefrontal cortex. So by using these regulation and activity breaks, we can help bring the children's brain from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex. Now, by moving the children's brain from that fight or flight, or from that from that amygdala brain, the brain that is causing emotion, not listening, we can bring it to the prefrontal cortex, which means they are listening, processing, and thinking. And we can do that using our movement breaks. Now, I don't want you to think about the movement breaks as running around, dancing, physical, and a little bit silly. I want you to think about these movement breaks as switching the brain. Now, we say movement, but often what we mean is to regulate and to stabilize the children's emotions, thoughts, and feelings. And most of the time, that does not mean doing huge amounts of physical activity. We talk to schools and parents and teachers all of the time that say that the children with ADHD, for example, are given these movement breaks and it's making them worse. And that is because they are not engaging the prefrontal cortex. They are keeping themselves in that amygdala. Now, the only way that we can transfer the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex is by calming the amygdala down. We need to get the child to think, we need to get the child to concentrate, or we need to get them to learn. And there are a few ways that we can do this. We often find that adding regulation, sensory, and movement breaks in after playtime works the best for our ADHD children. Over playtime and lunchtimes, children can become dysregulated. They are unstructured and untaught times. Children can become overwhelmed and their brains are sitting in that fight or flight mode, which means that their behaviours can then become worse. However, we were regulating our children after the playtimes to bring them back and to settle and calm their amygdala and to switch it into the prefrontal cortex. So we have found that for most of our children, we are using the movement and sensory breaks to calm the children, not to excite them, not to get them more worked up, not to get them in that state where they are sitting in the amygdala, but to bring them to the prefrontal cortex. Now, you will know your child and you will know the children within your classroom and you will know what type of regulation break that they need. I don't want you to see this as a huge task or a burden. We need to be implementing these breaks for our children and for ourselves. So I don't want you to see them as an inconvenience or something that you have to fit into your day. This needs to become part of your day, part of your routine, and as simple as and easy as possible. Now, you do not need any fancy equipment. You do not need lots of space. Please don't start taking them to the hall and doing it in the hall. You can do it in your classroom. I have led these movement breaks for 15 years in the tiniest classroom with up to 35 children and 5 adults. You need to allow yourself time. Just like I said, I don't want this to become an add-on or a burden. You need to stop with the teacher guilt and stop with the chasing targets and stop with the pressure. I know it's hard and I know that we sometimes come bogged down with all of the things that we need to fit in, but these are so vital and so important for our children. So this is your cue and this is me telling you and giving you permission to allow yourself that time. We now timetable in 2 sessions every day, and you might think that you just don't have time for that and it's another thing on top of your day, but I promise you that when you have practiced it and got it down and know what you are doing, these can sometimes even be a minute to 2 minutes max, which you would spend managing or dealing with the behavior anyway. Teachers are spending around 2 hours a day managing behaviour. However, let's switch that and think about how much time would we spend managing behaviour if there was no behaviour to manage because the children were already regulated. we had 2 sessions of movement and regulation sensory breaks, and they were one in the morning because our mornings were quite long. So it was just to give the children a little bit of time. Now, these would be probably the active ones. These would be the ones with the dancing and the moving and the fitness. I would lead them, but these would be the ones to get them stimulated and to bring them back. Now, after lunch, straight after lunch, we would do another one, and that would be the calming. So that wouldn't be the stimulating break. That wouldn't be the one where we want them to reconnect that brain. This one would be the one where we want to calm. So we would use the one after lunch as a calming. It would be a little bit of yoga, perhaps some meditation, thinking about breathing. We would use tools and tasks to get them to switch that brain from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex by using learning and thinking. Now, I want you to lead the movement breaks. I was working with a school recently who told me that they got rid of the movement breaks because they caused more issues. And they can. If they are not led and kept calm, and if they are not facilitated all the way through, then they can spiral and cause even worse behaviors. However, if you use your movement break and you lead it almost like a calming meditation yoga session, the children won't come out of the other side bouncing around and more excited than what they were before. So think really carefully about how you structure and how you lead your sensory sessions. I used to, at the very beginning, when I first started doing this 14 years ago, would be really excited, and they were almost like Mr. Motivator sessions because I thought that's what the kids needed. And I thought a bit of movement, a bit of jazzercise, and that went terribly. The lessons were awful after that. And it wasn't until I switched it up and realized that actually the children needed a calming session to regulate and bring their brain from amygdala to prefrontal cortex that we managed to nail it. On top of our movement breaks, to help support our ADHD children within our mainstream classroom, we can stop talking. And that is easier said than done, especially for teachers when talking is our main point. However, remember, these children struggle to process verbal information, especially when there is too much of it. So stop talking. When we don't need to say something, don't talk. Limit your language, limit the instructions that you are giving. Use the visual information to help support the information that they already have. By talking too much, we are causing cognitive overload, which means that these children cannot see the woods for the trees. So just be really mindful throughout your day about how much language you are using whilst talking or teaching. Just like our children with dyslexia, we have a video about supporting children with dyslexia if you have got any dyslexic children within your mainstream classroom. But just like our children with dyslexia, these children struggle to process information. They also struggle to process information from working memory into long-term memory. So I want you to think about the ADHD brain in a similar way in terms of us trying to help that child process as much information as possible. And to do that, we need to repeat. By repeating information over and over, we can help those children process the information from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. Some more things that we have used to help our ADHD children within our mainstream classroom are, for example, rewards and consequence system. Now, we use a consequence system which is linked to neuroscience, which means that the consequences actually work. For the consequences to work, we need to link them directly to that behaviour, and we use something called the Children's Behaviour book. That book can be found in our store and is used in our residential children's home and with our foster care children. Children with neurodiverse needs, and especially our ADHD children, sometimes struggle to link action to behaviours, and using a consequence that actually works will help link the behaviour to the consequence. Throughout the 15 years with our neurodiverse ADHD children within our mainstream classroom, one of the things that we have found has been a godsend has been setting predictable routines for throughout the day and timetables. And I know it's easy to say that when sometimes in schools we need to be flexible and we need to be ready for any given event. However, try to set every day as similar as you can. Our children knew that every Monday was RE, every Tuesday afternoon was art, every Wednesday morning we had PE. The week was the same. So every Monday, every week was the same. Every Tuesday, every week was the same. And what we found with our ADHD children was it reduced their anxieties and reduced their behaviours. Those children with ADHD no longer felt like they had to clarify what was going to happen that day. They stopped asking all of the questions because they knew exactly what was happening. We want children with ADHD to be able to process and understand information. However, if they are left in the guessing stage, or if they are left with unanswered questions, or they don't know what is happening during that day, it can cause overload of the brain, and they can spend all of their time thinking about the unnecessary things that they don't need to be thinking about, because we should have provided that already. Think about the child's day and think about everything that you can do to reduce anxiety and overthinking throughout that day. And whatever you can do, do something about it. Our timetables and our structures of our day were up on the wall. We had visual timetables for those children so that they knew exactly what was going to happen, which would reduce that anxiety. We did this using visual daily and weekly timetables, and these were displayed on the children's desk and on the wall. One of our ADHD children would come in every single day to check that it was right for the rest of the kids. They also referred to it during the day to make sure that they knew exactly what was going to happen and there would be no surprises. We would prepare our ADHD children and the rest of the children as well. I know myself as a teacher, I did not like it when somebody would come in and say, oh, we forgot to say the library bus was here. Not only would it cause me a huge amount of stress, but it would cause the children a huge amount of stress. So I knew what that felt like. So any event that was going to happen, we would prepare them for that wherever possible. For our ADHD children, we would teach them every behaviour cue. Just like the rest of our children, we would go through every behaviour that we would like to see or we would expect to see within the mainstream classroom and talk to them about what that would look, sound and feel like. We would use the Teach to Change behaviour model to teach those behaviours to the children so that they would understand and learn the expected behaviour cues. Alongside these tools and techniques, we would use something called the Welcome Pack. Now, this piece of information is part of the Back to School Behaviour Bootcamp, but we would use it for our neurodiverse learners. Any child that had ADHD, autism, we would provide them with a Welcome Pack that they would look at over the summer holidays. And this would mean that they would get to know every routine, boundary, structure, every transition that was going to happen within the classroom so that they could then get used to it and they could process the information that they've been given. Again, anything that we can do to support that child and their overthinking of that activity would help alleviate and reduce that cognitive overload. I almost want you to think every time that you are talking or teaching a child with ADHD, it's a show, don't tell. Now, we have successfully been able to support ADHD children within our classroom for 15 years with no alternative provision and nowhere else to send them. Most recently, our biggest success story was we had an educational psychologist come into our classroom to assess 2 children with ADHD. Because of all of the tools and techniques that we'd put in place, he couldn't identify or pick out the 2 children with ADHD from the rest of the mainstream classroom. This also happened with another ADHD child who was having a visit from CAMS. The CAMS team came into the classroom and asked me to point out and identify the child with ADHD because they couldn't find him. If you have got any more questions about supporting ADHD children within your mainstream classroom, then please pop them below or send me an email. And don't forget to find our Neurodiverse in the Mainstream Classroom Toolkit for any more printables or information. I'm Danielle Douglas. Let's talk behaviour.